Joe. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves Caitlin.
The most talked about figure in basketball has gone quiet, yet the conversation surrounding her has only grown louder. This is no longer just a debate about a roster omission. It has evolved into a broader discussion about how one of the biggest promotional opportunities in modern sports appears to be slipping through the league's hands. And now, one of the most influential personalities in sports media, Stephen A. Smith, has intensified the conversation with comments that many believe reflect tensions the league has been reluctant to acknowledge publicly. According to Smith's framing, Caitlin Clark's situation goes far beyond reduced playing time. He suggests she has stepped back from a system that, in his view, didn't fully embrace what she brought to the sport. For months, the public message attempted to emphasize metrics, team chemistry, veteran priority, and traditional selection standards. Officials pointed to established processes and long-standing expectations to explain the decisions being made. But when observers look past formal statements and curated press briefings, a more complicated picture begins to emerge. Critics argue that deeper issues, including internal tensions, questions of influence, and concerns about how new stars reshape long-standing dynamics, may be contributing to the narrative. What's left is a sense that the story goes beyond box scores and rotations, touching on themes of power, perception, and how a rapidly rising star can unsettle a system still adapting to its own growth. The conversation has now shifted into even more complicated territory, with talk of behind-the-scenes tension turning the Olympic discussion into a symbolic battleground. Stephen A. Smith didn't simply question the roster choice. He challenged the deeper issues surrounding it, pointing to dynamics within the sport that many fans have long speculated about but few insiders have addressed openly. Smith suggested that Clark may be fully aware of the circumstances surrounding her situation, not because she lacks ability, but because her rapid rise has changed the landscape in ways the system has been slow to adapt to. His remarks ignited a wave of speculation across social platforms and sports shows, where commentators debated whether the pressures surrounding her popularity had influenced recent decisions. The rumor mill has only intensified, with some reports suggesting that even if an invitation were extended later, Clark might not be inclined to pursue it. Those claims indicate she may no longer feel the need to seek approval from a circle of peers who, fairly or not, have been portrayed as skeptical of the attention she receives. Whether these reports are accurate or simply the product of a heated news cycle, they highlight how dramatically the story has evolved. So the larger question now becomes, why would one of the most widely followed athletes in the country hesitate to embrace the biggest international stage in sports? The answer may lie in a complex blend of expectations, pressure, and the challenges that come with being a breakout star in a league still navigating its rapid growth. The situation continues to unfold, and the entire basketball world is watching closely to see what happens next. What did Stephen A. Smith pick up on that others seem to overlook? And is this the moment when the long-established leadership of women's basketball unintentionally pushed away the very athlete capable of elevating the sport to unprecedented heights? The unfolding situation around Caitlin Clark's absence from the Olympic roster is beginning to reveal the complicated realities of professional athletics, the kind of behind-the-scenes pressure the public rarely gets to see. To understand why Stephen A. Smith has spoken so forcefully about this issue, we need to revisit the moment the news first surfaced. It began like any routine roster release, the kind that usually sparks a brief debate before fading into the next day's headlines. A few disagreements here and there, some fan commentary, and then the cycle moves forward. But this time was different, dramatically different. When early reports suggested that Caitlin Clark, one of the most watched athletes in the country, might not be included, the reaction wasn't limited to a few disappointed viewers. It triggered a wave of conversation that stretched far beyond the sports world. Commentators, analysts, and everyday fans all reacted in real time, treating the development not as routine roster news but as a major cultural moment. The situation quickly grew into a national discussion about expectations, influence, and what it means when a rising star intersects with long-standing structures within a sport. What followed wasn't just debate. It was an examination of how decisions are made, who benefits from them, and how the landscape of women's basketball is being reshaped as its audience expands. This story is still developing, and its implications extend far beyond one tournament. The broader questions it raises about visibility, leadership, and the future of the sport are likely to echo long after the Olympic cycle ends. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another name on a roster sheet. She was the one athlete filling every seat in arenas that hadn't seen a sellout crowd in 10 years. So when word spread that she wasn't on the Olympic list, the reaction went far beyond disappointment. It was explosive. Fans weren't confused. They were furious. The justification offered by the selection committee sounded rehearsed, even formulaic. They cited experience, the continuity of a multi-year program, and the importance of chemistry. On the surface, it all seemed reasonable. But to anyone paying attention to what was happening outside the committee room, it rang hollow. Because here's the truth. When a generational talent emerges, you don't bench them for being new. Nobody would have told a young Michael Jordan to stay home because he hadn't loved enough years. Nobody would have told an early career Tiger Woods to wait his turn because he hadn't checked every box on a bureaucratic checklist. When a star is that impactful, you make room. You find a way. You put them on the plane, and this is where the tone of the story shifted. Quietly, behind the scenes, murmurs began circulating. Not official statements, nothing on the record, just the kind of whispers that ripple through hallways when a decision has more layers than the public explanation reveals. People familiar with the process suggested that the choice wasn't accidental at all. It wasn't an oversight. It may have been a signal. According to those whispers, there were worries about how certain established players might respond to Clark's presence. Her spotlight, her impact, the massive wave of attention she brings with her everywhere she goes. Whether those concerns were real, exaggerated, or misinterpreted, the fact that they were being discussed at all added a new, uncomfortable dimension to the story. It shifted the narrative from simple roster politics to something far more complicated. The tension between a rising superstar and a deeply entrenched hierarchy trying to preserve its balance. Rumors swirled that the committee wasn't just debating skill. They were debating the spectacle, the attention, the cameras, the crowds, the undeniable reality that wherever Caitlin Clark goes, a full-blown media surge follows. According to those whispers, the concern wasn't whether she could compete. It was whether the spotlight she drags behind her like a comet would disrupt the veterans who saw this as their team, their moment, their stage. In other words, this didn't look like strategy. It looked like ego management. Instead of asking, what grows the sport, insiders suggested the question became, who might feel overshadowed? And that, right there, is where Stephen A. Smith drew his battle line. Because when he spoke out, he wasn't just challenging the logic behind the decision. He was accusing the committee of something far more explosive in the world of professional sports. Self-sabotage. Stephen A. Smith has never been shy about bold opinions, but his reaction to Clark's omission felt different. It carried weight. It carried frustration. It was the tone he uses when he thinks a decision is so bad, so damaging, so baffling, that it cannot be explained by basketball alone. On national television, he unloaded. He didn't mince words, he didn't soften the edges, and he didn't hide his disbelief. In his view, keeping Clark off the roster wasn't just a mistake. It was, in his words, idiotic. Not because she's the best player in the world, not because she's a guaranteed medal winner, but because, as Smith emphasized, she is the one athlete capable of dragging the entire sport into a new era of relevance. And you don't bench that kind of momentum. But it wasn't just name-calling or outrage for entertainment value. Stephen A. Smith did what he always does when he wants to make a point impossible to ignore. He brought out the business argument. And when you lay the numbers side by side the way he did, the decision doesn't just look questionable. It looks baffling. Smith broke it down in the simplest terms. The Olympics are the biggest marketing stage on Earth every 4 years. Casual viewers, people who haven't watched a single WNBA game in their lives, suddenly tune in. They watch sports they barely understand. They learn names they've never heard before. It's a spotlight you can't buy, can't replicate, and can't replace. And women's basketball, historically, has been fighting for visibility, for ratings, for cultural traction. For decades, the conversation has been about how to get more people to watch, how to grow the audience, how to bring attention to a sport that deserves far more than it gets. Then suddenly, miraculously, you have Caitlin Clark, a player who doesn't just bring attention. She generates it on command, a player who has networks rearranging programming, a player who sells out arenas in minutes, a player who makes people who never cared about the WNBA before start watching midweek games in Indiana like they are must-see TV. And Team USA leaves her at home. To Smith, this wasn't a basketball oversight, it was a marketing meltdown. He reminded viewers that the US women's basketball team isn't exactly scraping by in international competition. They are dominant, overwhelmingly dominant. The kind of dominant where the real competition isn't the scoreboard. It's the viewership numbers. He pointed out a brutal truth. The US could send a roster of college all-stars and still be favored to win gold. So if victory isn't the variable, what is? Visibility, branding, growth, the exact things Clark brings in unprecedented volume. And that's why Smith hammered the decision so hard. Because from a business standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, from a global exposure standpoint, Team USA didn't just fumble the ball, they dropped it in an empty gym and everyone heard the echo. The goal, according to Smith, should have been simple: grow the game, expand the brand. Elevate women's basketball onto the global stage with the biggest star the sport has seen in decades. But instead of embracing that opportunity, Smith argued that the decision-makers pulled the shutters down and locked the doors. In his view, the people running the show didn't just prioritize experience or continuity. They prioritized hierarchy, the invisible ladder that protects the old guard, maintains the status quo, and keeps the biggest disruptor the sport has ever seen outside the gates. He didn't mince words, he practically said the quiet part out loud. If incompetence doesn't explain it, maybe ego does. Smith insinuated that the decision was so irrational, so self-defeating, that you almost have to factor in something darker, a kind of malice disguised as team culture. Because this wasn't a missed opportunity. In his eyes, it was an opportunity actively rejected. And the part that struck people hardest, Smith made it clear that Caitlin Clark isn't just shrugging this off. According to him, she's not forgetting who stayed silent, that she's not forgetting who defended the decision. And she's certainly not forgetting who benefited from keeping her out. If she truly feels disrespected, if her team believes she was deliberately snubbed, then the bridge between Clark and the establishment may already be ashen. That changes everything. But if we're going to be honest about why Caitlin Clark isn't in Paris, we have to confront the word everyone's been dancing around for months. The WNBA may want to dodge the jealousy narrative, but it remains the only explanation that makes every piece of this puzzle lock into place. Because if you rewind the tape to before Caitlin Clark ever played a single professional minute, the signs were already flashing like warning sirens. You had legends, the very titans who built the foundation of the league, seemingly taking shots at a rookie who hadn't even laced up on WNBA hardwood yet. Diana Taurasi, a generational talent and a guaranteed Hall of Famer, fired the first verbal missile. Reality is coming for Caitlin Clark. Some called it advice, others called it a threat. But either way, it signaled something unmistakable. The veterans were bracing for impact. Then came Cheryl Swoops, another name carved into the stone of women's basketball history, publicly nitpicking Clark's college resume, even misrepresenting basic facts, suggesting she was only dominant because she chucked 40 shots a game. It was bizarre. It was unnecessary, and it begged one question: why were the legends so pressed about a kid who was still sitting in her cap and gown? The answer, or at least the theory that Stephen A. Smith and many others have danced around, is painfully human resentment, not because Clark did anything wrong, not because she disrespected anyone, but because she walked into a level of fame, attention, money, and global impact that the pioneers of the sport never got, despite sacrificing far more. These women played in echoing arenas. They flew commercial flights. They grinded through seasons for salaries that wouldn't cover a bench player's per diem today. They built the house brick by brick while nobody watched. Then Clark arrives, 22 years old, at sold-out arenas, record-breaking ratings, multi-million-dollar endorsements, a cultural spotlight the league has been begging for since its inception. And the veterans, they are human, they are proud. And some of them feel overshadowed in the very moment. They believe the spotlight was supposed to be theirs. That tension, the collision between what the old guard endured and what Clark instantly inherited, is the unspoken fault line running through this entire saga. And this is where the story stops being about marketing and media narratives and starts becoming something far more uncomfortable. Because once the resentment moved from quotes to contact, the tone changed, fans saw it, commentators saw it, clips went viral every week. Caitlin Clark wasn't just being defended. She was being targeted. That was the perception forming across the entire sports world. Every rookie takes hits, every star gets bumped. But Clark's collisions felt different, harder, more frequent. More personal, screens that look more like blindsides, hip checks that look more like body shots, fouls that somehow never got whistles. And every time she hit the floor, half the internet asked the same question. If this were any other player, would that have been allowed? Whether that's fair or not, it became the dominant storyline. Because perception, especially in 2024, is reality. And when those clips started circulating around social media, something deeper took hold. A sense that Clark wasn't just navigating the normal physicality of the pros, she was navigating the emotion of them. For months, analysts debated whether it was jealousy, competitiveness, hazing, or simply physical basketball. But one thing was crystal clear. The environment surrounding her was becoming toxic. And suddenly, the Olympic snub didn't look like a setback. It looked like an escape hatch. Because if this is how she was treated in her own league, what would the pressure be like in an Olympic locker room full of the very veterans who had already made their stance clear? Why walk into a room where the tension is thick enough to cut with a knife? Why chase validation from people who aren't interested in giving it? From that angle, the snub starts looking less like rejection and more like relief.